Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our discussion on plant-forward eating and inspiration. I'm Kirby Bransafort, a registered dietitian and Wegmans nutritionist, and I will be your presenter today. We know that now, more than ever, folks are looking to include more plant foods in their diets because of the incredible positive impact they have on health and well-being. Today, we will cover some basics about eating plant-forward and give you some inspiration for taking plant-forward flavor to the next level. At the end of the presentation, I will be joined by my colleague, Kathleen O'Haron, who will help moderate our Q&A. So let's go ahead and jump right in. First of all, let's all get on the same page about what we mean when we say plant-forward. We use this to describe any eating approach or meal that emphasizes plant foods like your fruits and veggies, beans, and whole grains, but it can certainly include other food groups like meat or seafood. It can be used to describe someone who's just trying to eat more plant foods, but it also can include vegetarians, flexitarians, and vegans. And because there are varying degrees of eating plant-forward, we use it as an umbrella term to kind of cover any approach that's just focused on eating more plants, regardless of the presence or absence of other food groups. That being the case, what we discussed today is going to be kind of a broad brushstroke of eating plant-forward that you could then tailor to meet your own individual preferences or eating approach. Now, we're going to start by tackling some common questions we get about creating nutritious plant-forward meals, about protein on plant-forward eating patterns, and then move on to how to make your plant-forward meals taste amazing. Starting first with this question about what we can do to create healthy plant-forward meals. So how do I make my plant-forward meal healthy? And honestly, we would answer this question the same way we would for any type of meal, by suggesting you consider balancing your meal with nutrient-dense choices. But you might be wondering, well, what does balance look like and what are nutrient-dense choices? Well, first, balance is basically about creating enough space for all the foods you need to support good health. The goal of balance is to get a variety of food groups, so really not too much and not too little of any food, and that would then translate into getting the nutrients that your body needs for everyday functioning and kind of optimal health. Now, to build a balanced plate, think about getting 3 different food groups at each meal, as you can see here in our little plate icon. As illustrated, a great way to start is to think about splitting your plate or your bowl between grains, veggies, and protein. Now, depending on your approach, that protein could be something like fish or chicken if you're a little bit more flexible in your plant-forward eating approach, or it could be a plant protein like tofu or beans. And this really is just a guide. It's meant to be flexible, so you might swap your veggies for fruit or add some healthy fats from liquid oils or nuts. But the foundational concept here is that building a balanced meal will get you a variety of nutrients, and the simplest way to get that balanced meal is to include 3 or more food groups. But we're not going to stop there. The types of foods you choose matters too. So to truly get the most nutritional benefit from a balanced plant-forward meal, you want to be filling your plate with choices that are considered nutrient-dense, which really just means there's a lot of nutrients per calorie. So it's kind of the opposite of empty calories. And you can think of it as getting the most bang for your buck. In general, whole or minimally processed foods with limited added sugars and sodium are a good place to start if you're looking for nutrient density. So for example, whole grain breads, frozen or canned veggies, hummus, nut butters would be considered nutrient-dense choices. Now, you can certainly enjoy other types of foods, but the emphasis on balance and nutrient density will really give you a good foundation for healthy plant-forward meals. For more guidance, we would encourage you to check out our healthy eating guidelines that can be found on Wegmans.com. And those provide information on foods that are nutrient-dense and linked with good health that you could include in your daily and weekly menus. Now let's move on to one of the most common questions that comes up when we start talking about plant-forward eating, which is, what about protein? People regularly ask, how do I meet my protein needs on a plant-forward diet? Well, first let's start with, for reference, the RDA, which is the recommended dietary allowance, which is for any nutrient, the minimum amount needed to prevent deficiency. The actual RDA for protein is based on body weight, and it's 0.8 grams per kilograms of body weight per day. But on average, that works out to be about 46 grams for women and 56 grams for men per day. And here's the thing. Most of us do get enough. So when researchers have looked at this, even when they've looked at vegans, which is a group of folks who aren't including any animal protein or products, in general, that population meets or exceeds protein recommendations. And that's because plant foods have protein, and it really does all add up. So as you can see from the examples here, bread, walnuts, broccoli, they all have protein. Even an apple has protein. So when you include more of these foods in your diet, it will all add up. Now, if you look at those RDAs and assume you're eating 3 meals a day, that puts us in the ballpark of needing about 15 to 20 grams of protein per meal to meet that RDA. And now here's an example of a recipe on Wegmans.com. Our French grain lentils will give you 13 grams of protein per half cup serving. And that's a lot of protein. Now, if you think about enjoying that with a few more veggies and some nice bread, or maybe you have a whole cup of the French grain lentils, you're easily making your way to meeting that RDA. So that's total protein. As long as you're eating enough to support your calorie needs, you're very likely meeting that RDA, so that minimal amount. But the next question we get is, well, what about the type of protein? Specifically, what about complete versus incomplete protein? Now, if you're not familiar with this concept, we'll start with some definitions. A complete protein contains adequate amounts of all the essential amino acids. So those are your protein building blocks. On the other hand, incomplete proteins contain an inadequate amount of at least one or more of those essential amino acids. They're called essential because we need to get them from our food. So the difference here is that the amino acids from a complete protein source can be readily used to build protein in your body, while the incomplete proteins just need a little bit of help. And the reason this question comes up with plant-forward eating is because all animal and seafood proteins are complete protein, but most plant proteins are actually incomplete, with a few exceptions, which you see listed here. These are some of the most common complete plant proteins. You've got quinoa, soy, like you'd find in your tofu or edamame, and buckwheat. So it's a great idea to include these in your plant-forward eating rotation. But what would that mean for the rest of your plant foods? Now, to answer this, we would first touch on the idea of complementary proteins. Complementary proteins are two proteins that individually are incomplete, but provide adequate amounts of all those essential amino acids when combined, meaning that together they make a complete protein, kind of like you're completing a puzzle. Now, years and years ago, the thought was that these foods had to be eaten at the same meal, those complementary proteins, which meant folks would kind of micromanage not just their total protein intake, but their amino acid intake. And as you can imagine, that would make it quite a chore to kind of build out a meal plan. However, we have learned that it's actually not necessary to strictly combine your proteins to get the amino acids you need. Your body can actually make complete proteins when you eat a variety of food groups over the course of the day, because each food group, like legumes versus grains, has a different amino acid profile. So if you get a variety, that ensures an intake of complementary proteins over the course of the day. So the message here is that you don't have to really overthink it. Just focus on eating a variety of different food groups, and the amino acids and protein will kind of work itself out. But there's not really a benchmark for variety, so you might wonder how exactly you're going to accomplish that. So we would just want to revisit our balanced plate here for the answer. So if you build your meals with 3 food groups and you're changing up your grains, you're getting a variety of different types of proteins, and you have a lot of colorful fruits and veggies, and you're making sure you're not having the same exact meal for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day, then that is the practice that's going to help you achieve variety, getting you the variety of different food groups and those complementary proteins. Now, protein can easily be a class all on its own. And today we just wanted to give some basic introductory information. And honestly, the research about protein and amino acids is ever evolving. There are quite a few nuances to it. So this is just some good foundational information. For more in-depth information on protein, we'd encourage you to explore resources from the Vegetarian Resource Group found at vrg.org. There's a lot of great info there about plant protein sources and example meals to help you meet your protein needs. Now, speaking of plant proteins, One of the main plant proteins we recommend that you include regularly in a plant-forward pattern of eating is beans. But we're often told that folks struggle with beans, knowing how to use them and how to make them taste amazing.
Which leads me to our first chef's tip from our culinary team here at Wegmans, which is all about the beans. Our culinary friends have walked us through what can help you be successful when cooking with this very affordable and versatile protein. Because we know you might open up your pantry and stare at all these cans of beans and you're thinking like, I don't know where to start. So first, let's acknowledge something. We don't really use beans the same way you would with an animal protein. It's not like you would just kind of put a pile of beans where there might have otherwise been a piece of chicken. Instead, we use them for different types of applications. So things like adding them to salad, to soups, maybe to some grain bowls. They can be used in tacos, either as your main protein or maybe as a replacement for something like a ground beef or ground turkey. And they're wonderful as spreads or hummus. Our chefs shared an easy ratio with us for making a quick spread is to take the whole can of beans with half their liquid in your food processor. That's going to give you the right consistency and texture you might be looking for, and then you can kind of season it up as you like. Now, a bean spread or a hummus can be used in a variety of ways, like on top of crackers, as a dip, or certainly in a wrap or a sandwich. So that's how we use them, a little bit different than you might think of a typical animal protein. And then here are some culinary tips to make sure you are getting the best bean experience. First and foremost, include the liquid. Our chefs couldn't stress this enough to us. They call it liquid gold. When it makes sense for your dish, including that is going to add flavor and body and a mouthfeel and really a different type of experience for your dish. Next, you could think about dressing them with something like a vinaigrette or a simmer sauce. We have a really great line of Wegmans brand simmer sauces, and some suggestions that our chefs gave us here was our Charlie's curry simmer sauce with any white bean, or maybe our tikka masala with a garbanzo bean. So you could eat that just like that, or you could kind of dress them up like this before you add them to something like a salad or a bowl. So these tips really kind of transform a simple can of beans into something so much more exciting that you'll be really thrilled to eat. So you could try your hand at these tips to add your beans to your rotation, and certainly check out some recipes that we have on Wegmans.com. We do have plenty of bean recipes. These are just a few of our favorites. We've got a really wonderful greens and beans recipe. The Tuscan beans with basil, pesto, and mushrooms, I have to say, is my all-time ever favorite Wegmans recipe. I make it all the time, and it's great because you can swap ingredients in and out depending on what you have on hand. And definitely check out our hummus recipe, especially because it features our brand new Wegmans brand tahini, which actually tastes like no other tahini I've ever had. It's amazing. So we really encourage you to check that out. Our next tip is all about creating plant-forward bowls. And we love this concept because we find that a lot of people get stuck in this kind of rut of thinking their meals need to be built a certain way, like that standard plate with a piece of protein and some sides. But plant-forward meals aren't always going to look like that, and they can take many different forms. And what could be more fun than throwing everything together in a bowl and kind of mixing it up? So while you could do this anyway you'd like, we want to share some simple steps that you can fall back on, starting with those components of our balanced meal that you see once again on the side here. Starting with your base of grains. So if you are someone who doesn't eat a lot of grains or you don't include grains, this could also be something like a cauliflower rice or a veggie noodle, or you could have a farro, a bulgur. If you're looking for a gluten-free option, something like brown rice or a quinoa would be a really great base here. And we have some really wonderful step and time saver rices in grocery. We have some steamables that are ready anywhere 60 to 90 seconds. One of my favorites is our frozen brown rice. It's ready in 3 minutes in the microwave. So it's nice to have those types of quick things on hand if you're going to start throwing some fun stuff together. Next, we move on to our veggies. And this could be any form of veggie that works for you. It could be frozen, canned, or fresh. We've got some great frozen vegetable blends, or certainly some pre-cut veggies are nice for time savers. This could even be some leftover veggies, whatever really sounds good to you that you think will kind of incorporate well into a bowl. And then the last piece of our balanced meal here is going to be the protein. Here you see some tofu, but that could also be edamame, beans, chickpeas. It could be a meat alternative. frozen veggie burger, or if you are somebody who is a little bit more flexitarian, maybe it could be something like a shrimp or a chicken. So that's covering our bases for our balanced meal, but we don't stop there. We've got to keep on moving and add some flavor and moisture and pull everything together with a sauce. This could be something like an Asian sauce or any number of sauces, or a dressing even, a salsa, vinaigrettes and marinades, just something to kind of bring everything together. And then you top it off with those finishing touch for texture and crunch and a little bit more excitement. Could be pumpkin seeds, slivered almonds, or a vegetable with some crunch like a shredded carrot or a shredded lettuce. So this is just a really fun way to think about plant-forward eating. We have some poke bowls and power meals in our restaurant foods that are great grab-and-go options. And we're also very excited. Soon in our stores, you'll see some frozen bowls and some frozen cauliflower, rice, and beans on the way that will be a great step saver for you. So you could use these grab-and-go items when you're short on time, or they could be inspiration for building your own bowl. And you might be thinking, well, the possibilities are endless, the combinations are endless. And if you're like me, sometimes I get paralyzed with indecision, and so you don't really know where to start. So our advice here would be to pick a cuisine or a theme to build your bowls around. And I've got some examples of that here. Some of my friends and I got together to make these, and it was so much fun. And really, you can see just by looking at this, they all have a different feel to them, and they're all plant forward. We have an Asian bowl that we use some white rice, our frozen stir fry blends, our garlic sesame sauce, which I actually at home have on hand a lot, topped with some sesame seeds. You could add a little tofu there for a bit more protein. Our Mediterranean bowl, which was some quinoa, chickpeas, cucumbers and tomatoes, Greek dressing, which is delicious, topped with slivered almonds. Our Latin bowl, which was with white rice, some black beans, avocado, onions, salsa for the sauce, and topped with shredded lettuce and cilantro. And a Latin bowl, this is kind of an idea for a theme. So I don't know about you, but if I try to feed my kids the same dinner 2 nights in a row, I kind of get the look like, seriously, Mom? So this is kind of a fun way to reinvent your leftovers and give it new life. So we use some brown rice with some frozen veggies, then top with a vinaigrette and tortilla chips. How fun is that for a little added crunch? And I'm guessing the little ones get more excited about things when they're topped with chips. So it adds a nice whole grain, some texture, crunch. So this is really just a fun way to think about plant-forward eating that gives you a little bit more flexibility than that standard plate. And our last chef's tip is all about stocking up on what I like to call the flavor makers. So getting familiar and comfortable with using dried and fresh herbs is a simple way to take the flavor of your plant-forward dishes kind of up a notch. But before you start adding handfuls of herbs to your dishes, let's talk about a few culinary tips that you want to keep in mind. So for your heartier dried herbs, like your sage, rosemary, and thyme, those can be used in dishes with longer cooking times because they'll hold their flavor. So they can be added early in the cooking process, but they could also be added at the end. If you do add them at the end, you'll want to use just a small amount so that you're not overpowering your dish. Your delicate and fresh herbs, on the other hand, like a fresh basil, chives, parsley, cilantro, maybe a fresh tarragon, those don't do so well in a longer cook time because they kind of break down. Those are great to add at the end, give it that finishing touch and kind of a pop of fresh flavor. Another tip for bringing flavor forward is to use a bit of acidity at the end. So this could be something like a squeeze of lemon or lime or a dash of vinegar. If you include dairy in your approach, this could even be something like a bit of plain Greek yogurt on top. But if you're worried that your meal might suddenly taste like lemon or whatever acid you've chosen, keep in mind this tip. Just give it a small amount, or as one of our chefs says, just a hit. So you can kind of give dimension to a flat flavor and give your dish that little something extra that it might seem like it's missing. And then lastly, be sure you keep your quick solutions on hand for adding flavor and dimension. Our Wegmans basting oil, or even a nice extra virgin olive oil, or any number of sauces are convenient ways to kind of level up your flavor, especially if you don't have a lot of time. So the message here is to kind of make friends with those flavor makers. Keep them stocked, keep them ready to go so you can transform your plant-forward meals into something you crave with simple but majorly flavorful additions. And lastly, brand new, I have to say completely hot off the presses is this brand new Plant Forward Lifestyles page that we have. If you visit wegmans.com/feelyourbest, literally moments before we began, this page went live. So you're hearing it here first. We're really excited about this resource. It's a great way to find information on identifying vegan items, weekly meal inspiration for a variety of plant-forward eating approaches, FAQs, and more. And it's really just a great place to start. If you're looking to get started, you want some inspiration. I know when we all saw it, we got very excited by all of the different ideas that were there. So we hope that you find that to be a very helpful resource as well. So like I said, visit wegmans.com/feelyourbest. Scroll on down to our special diets and eating approaches section, and then you'll find our Plant Forward Lifestyle pages that we're just, like I said, so excited to share with you. So that about wraps this part up. I think we have some really good time left here for some Q&A. And as I'm stopping my slides here, as I mentioned, I'll remind you that I will be joined by my colleague, Kathleen O'Haron, who is going to help moderate our Q&A and also assist in answering questions on behalf of our culinary team. So, Kathleen, I see you there. Good to see you.
Hey, Carbs, great job.
So
awesome
excited.
Information, friend. Yeah, let me just get situated here. So let me toss out the first question for you. So talking to getting more protein throughout the day, this question is, how do I get more protein at breakfast? What are some good options?
I am not surprised we got asked this question. And honestly, it's a great question. I think a lot of folks struggle with that. Not just people who eat plant forward, but all people, because a lot of folks find that it's hard to eat anything in the morning. So there's a couple thoughts I have here. First, I might even suggest that folks expand their definition of what a breakfast food is, right? Because if you're thinking of trying to find your protein in a limited number of foods that you think you're kind of like allowed to have at breakfast, I'm here to tell you that anything you feel like eating in the morning can be a breakfast food. So if for some reason you find that there's some protein options that work for you later in the day, there's no reason you couldn't have those in the morning. But, there are some pretty good traditional breakfasty type protein options that I can share. And we'll talk more about like the ones that kind of hit the vegetarian or vegan lines, just because I know that there's varying degrees of eating plant forward. So one thing I would say is maybe think about looking for kind of higher protein cereals. There's quite a few of those out there now. For example, we have Fall Harvest cereal. Our Wegmans brand Fall Harvest has about 5 grams of protein per serving. We have a Fitness Crunch cereal that has more. I think it's around 10. So looking to start with some higher protein cereals. And also, if you enjoy soy milk, that's a great option to make sure you're incorporating in the morning, because it's got a protein content that's comparable to cow's milk. And then you could think about add-ins like slivered almonds or pecans, and you might be surprised by how many uses you can find for sprinkling things on top of your food. Things like ground chia or flax are great. They add a little protein without a lot of bulk, and they incorporate really well into to many different dishes. Plant protein powder is a great way to boost your protein if you're doing something like a smoothie. We have a Wegmans brand protein powder that's vegan, and that's a great choice. I think it's around 18 grams of protein per scoop. And, if you're looking for something more like an egg dish and you don't do eggs, something like a tofu scramble can be a lot of fun. So if you just kind of mash up a block of medium firm tofu, like with a fork or a potato masher, you just cook it up just like an egg, which is a lot of fun too. And I know a lot of people like to add turmeric to add some yellow color to their tofu to make it feel more like an egg. So those are just some thoughts, getting some higher protein bases, cooking with some tofu, having those add-ins there to kind of just boost it up depending on what you're already eating. Do we have any other questions that we want to?
Yes, we do. So does the liquid in cans of beans have a lot of salt?
It can, yes. So this is a very good question. So it depends on the product, of course, but typically folks will ask about the liquid itself, and it does generally have about the same amount of sodium as the bean. I know I talked to one of our food scientists years ago and said that they kind of, the liquid in the bean itself actually have the same amount of sodium. So if you are concerned with sodium, then you can drain and rinse your beans to reduce the sodium. So just draining them will reduce it by a certain amount. And then if you rinse them kind of under cold running water for a bit, that's going to reduce it even more. I think it's been a while since I thought it's around like 40% or so that it can
it's around there. It's around there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And our culinary team also just had a good comment about using our basic bean recipe too.
Right.
Canned beans is definitely can be a quicker option if you're time crunched, but we have a basic bean recipe that we're going to post in the chat here for folks too. So if you want to actually cook your beans, that's a way to decrease the sodium as well, usually. Yeah.
And if you want to look that up on Wegmans.com, you just type in basic bean technique, right? And you'll find it.
I think we're going to try to get it in the chat, but yes. So you can definitely search it on Wegmans.com.
Yeah.
So, and you ready for another?
I am. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Yes, I am ready.
So any tips for incorporating anti-inflammatory options to plant-forward eating, which is great because
it's great. Yes.
A lot of
exactly. I would say by nature, plant-forward eating is anti-inflammatory. Whenever you find a list of anti-inflammatory foods, it is just full of fruits and veggies. So and whole grains and it's really the plant foods that have a lot of those anti-inflammatory properties. So I think just if you're eating more plant forward, you are incorporating anti-inflammatory foods. And there's certainly some that, some folks need to avoid for whatever reason. So I think whatever plant foods work for you, those are generally speaking going to be considered part of an anti-inflammatory pattern of eating. And when I think of, the gold standard for anti-inflammatory eating, it's really the Mediterranean style of eating, which is just so heavy on those plant foods. So.
Yeah, great.
All right.
I have another.
What else do we have?
Yes. So we have a question about nutrients, which I think there's a few questions about this. So, so basically, if someone is vegan, the question is about getting enough iron. That can be a challenge. So if you can speak to that, and then maybe any other, if it's calcium or B12, the other nutrients. But the person's question was specifically about iron. So
about iron. Perfect. Yes. Very, very good question. Very common question, especially if you are vegan, because as folks probably know, your plant foods aren't always going to have the same exact nutrients as animal foods. And when they do have them, sometimes they're a little bit different. And so iron in a vegan diet, iron definitely can be found in plant foods. So it's not only found in your big pieces of beef. It can also be found in foods like spinach, Swiss chard, and beans. So those are some kind of common ones for iron. But the thing to keep in mind with iron in your plant sources is that it's actually a different kind of iron. In your animal foods, it's going to be something called heme iron, Heme. And it's just very readily absorbed and used by our body. In plant sources, it's non-heme iron. That doesn't mean our body can't use it. It's just not absorbed as readily. But the good news with it is that there's a little trick to increase the absorption of iron on when you're getting non-heme iron, and that's just to eat it alongside a source of vitamin C. Vitamin C increases our absorption of iron. So that could be something like citrus, like orange juice, or red bell pepper, and that's going to increase the absorption. And so other nutrients that kind of come up, calcium, because that's so often found in our dairy foods, but it can also be found in plant sources like leafy green veggies like collards and kale, broccoli, almonds, and other fortified foods like a calcium fortified orange juice. And then B12 is another one that we get asked about a lot. So it's found only naturally in animal foods, but there's certainly some fortified foods that are plant foods with vitamin B12. So things like nutritional yeast that's fortified soy milk, some ready-to-eat cereals are fortified with it. So the message, though, at the end of the day is that, if you're concerned about any of these nutrients and if you're getting enough, or if you have questions about supplements especially, you might want to discuss those with your healthcare provider. But there's certainly plant options for all of these nutrients. And it looks like we are up on time. Oh my goodness, that went by so fast.
So when we're having fun, right?
At 1:00. And I just want to thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope you found some information and inspiration that's going to help you on your plant forward journey. And a huge thanks, of course, to our team here at Wegmans and our culinary friends that helped us with all of this great information. And thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful day.